The South African Federation of Trade Unions hosted their Workers' Day event in Durban today. The Federation also commemorated 50 years since the Durban strikes, which paved way for the legalization of workers' unions under the apartheid regime. Saftu's Ruth Ntlokotse joins us for more on the plight of workers. Ruth, good evening and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Kabelo, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. I mean, when we look at today being Workers' Day, May Day, and looking at the history of workers and the workers' plight, what would you say has changed? Are the issues different from 50 years back as you're commemorating the Durban strikes?
I think one thing that we need to acknowledge is the fact that material conditions then and now, they are totally different. The struggles, the challenges that workers were confronted with at that particular moment and even now, they're not the same. During 1973, I think that was during the apartheid era, and now we are at the post-democratic dispensation. Although when it comes to the policies, capitalism is still the same. Now we are at the neoliberal capitalism. And when it comes to how they restructured the economy, I think that's where we are having a difficulty. Because we've got different types of workforces. We've got workers that are casualized, formal sector, workers that are under gig economy, and then we've got workers that are permanent. I think that's where there's a distinction between workers then, before the democratic dispensation, even now. And the struggles or the challenges that workers are confronted or are waging, I think it's a bit different because if you can look at the labor movement at that particular moment and the labor movement now, the labor movement currently, we are a bit fragmented, we are a bit divided, and to such an extent that most of the workers, they don't find the relevancy of belonging to trade unions because they feel that we are not representing their issues very well. In the past, trade unions would campaign around issues that are affecting workers at the shop floor. But because of fragmentation, now it's a bit difficult for trade unions to take issues, to take up campaigns, let alone that even if there is an initiative to wage a certain campaign, when it comes to the level of participation, it is no longer as it was as compared to the past.
When then, if you talk about the plight of workers in that sense and saying that the issues might have changed, but would you then say that we are seeing, I guess, again, lack of a better phrasing, an improvement in terms of the plight of workers in the age of democracy vis-a-vis back then in apartheid, as you're talking the 73s and so
on? I think there was a moment where workers would have gained to a large extent. And immediately after 2007, we've seen, especially after the global meltdown, we've seen workers slowly losing the gains that they would have achieved because of the restructuring of the economy, like I said earlier on. That this fragmentation of workers being divided as casualized, precarious, informal sector because of the high rate of unemployment. These are some of the issues that led to trade unions not being able to master the art of speaking to the real issues that are affecting workers. For an example, I mean, if I were to be explicit or to be precise, most of the trade unions, they don't organize workers in informal sectors. Most of the trade unions find it difficult even to reach out to workers in the gig economy. I mean, the Uber drivers, where workers, they don't even understand who is their primary employer. And for us as trade unions, I think that's where we don't master the art of coming in and speak to issues or even be able to organize workers in that particular space.
Would you then say, based on that, Ruth, that workers have lost confidence in trade unions, in the role that trade unions are supposed to play?
I think workers are despondent. You know, one of the May Day that I attended today, because of workers were saying that we need to do an introspection, especially when we learn from the history of the workers of 1973. Workers were saying that we need to do an introspection as to whether are we still talking to the issues that are affecting workers. I must say that we are not as relevant as we should be as trade union. And that on its own, it has created that thing of workers not wanting to belong to trade unions. I mean, if you can look at the number of workers that are not unionized as we speak, it's more than 77% of workers in the workplace that are not belonging to trade unions, because of they feel that trade unions are not talking to their issues. And be that as it may, I think there are gains that, irrespective of the challenges that we are confronted with, that we can be able to pride ourselves that we are able to reach out, we are able to say that at least these are some of the things that we were able as a trade union to celebrate. For an example, I think 2 weeks ago, one of our affiliates, which is the biggest affiliate in Saftu, they've scored a largest victory at the apex court in the land, where when workers are embarking on industrial action, employers will hire the scab labor. And even if workers, they've withdrawn, they decided to come back, employers will continuously be using scab labor. The Constitutional Court has actually put an end to that. And we've seen how certain employers would exploit to such an extent that workers would be coming back one-on-one. And as a result of that, the right to embark on strike, which is the right that is enshrined in the Constitution, workers wouldn't want to exercise because of what employers would normally do. So there are some of the gains that would indicate that we are managed to celebrate, though difficult as it may currently. So the purpose of our May Day for today, across our 5 provinces, I think our National Executive Committee was very much explicit that we need to celebrate this May Day in commemorating the role played by the 1970s, 1973 in particular, Durban strike. Looking at what is it that we can learn from them, of course, looking at the material conditions that we are confronted with. And then among other issues that trade union labor movements were very much strong around was that issues of worker control, issues of democracy, issues of solidarity, and issues of it. I mean, now there's a social distance between trade unions and their leaders. The May Day celebration was explicit that we need to go back to basics. We need to make it a point that workers are going back and take control and ownership of their trade union, with an intention of ensuring that we give directions to our respective trade unions.
Allow me just to take you back to the decision you were touching on of the Constitutional Court on the issue of the use of scab labor. Would you then say that employers specifically, are taking advantage of, I guess, loopholes, lack of a better phrasing, and in the fact that they know that even though workers have the right, to strike, they can still be able to replace a Thabo Mdluli with a Kwena when Thabo Mdluli is not available to work?
It happened in 2018. When workers in the plastic sector exercised their right by embarking on a strike. Workers in some of the establishments, they were locked out for a period of 2 years. Hence, we are saying that employers would, and that scab labor that is being utilized during that particular time, they are not paid at the similar rate to those workers that are on strike. So you could see that when workers are exercising their constitutional right by embarking on a strike, employers are looking at an opportunity of further maximizing their profit by employing workers that are vulnerable, that are unemployed, with an intention of paying them less as compared to what they would have paid to workers that are possibly going out for a strike on issues of wages. So we've got a number of examples that we can be able to attribute that employers were actually misusing that lockout clause as enshrined in the Labour Relations Act. So we were very much grateful by the Constitutional Court when they put an end to that practice.
But what would you say causes that? Is it the issue of unemployment, in that there will always be somebody who will want to fill up that space when somebody is going on strike? Because there are no jobs. If I'm being called as a worker to say, people are on strike for 2 weeks, come in, we'll give you this little bit, people will take up that opportunity, because we know the issue of unemployment in South Africa.
I think it's a bit multifaceted. The issue of high unemployment rate, I think it's one of the contributing factors. And another issue that we also felt that we need to learn from the trade union labor movement during the 1970s was that issues that were affecting trade unions, communities would have been part and parcel of those struggles. To such an extent, when Company A in the respective localities are embarking on a strike, even the community members at that location would be able to pledge their solidarity. So what is currently happening now is that disjuncture between the trade union movement together with the working class organization that leads to a point that when companies or workers in a particular establishment are going for an industrial action, others they will seize an opportunity for them as an employment creation. I think that's where it creates a bit of a disjuncture, that relationship between trade labor movement and working class organization is no longer as it was before the 1994 democratic dispensation, if I may put it in that.
Yeah. So some of the issues, I mean, you touched on also, which I think is quite important, that unions themselves are not speaking in one voice. So you are disjointed. But, I mean, if I had to bring it closer to home, in that Saftu itself has had divisions in recent months. And what is being done to address those issues? I know it was also raised today as part of the May Day celebrations. Is that one of the things where people are losing confidence, where a movement itself, a union itself, is not as united as one deems it to be?
Differences of opinion, they will forever be there in each and every movement. I mean, even in our homes, there will continuously be differences of opinion. But what is important is how do we manage those differences? If those differences will go to an extent of not being managed in a proper manner, they will at stage be viewed as if like there's a disunity. I must admit that the conference of Saftu last year, it was marked by division, and division at some stage that was sometimes as a result of the approach on how certain matters should be handled. But post that conference, we had our first National Executive Committee, where all affiliates were given an opportunity to reflect and be able to provide a direction as to how can we move forward, especially learning from what transpired in a National Congress. And we must indicate that we are in a process of uniting, and it's not going to happen overnight. And we felt that some of the issues that can be resolved when we embark on unity in action, meaning that Saftu must go back to its basics. Saftu must go back to its intended objective of being the federation that will be seen as campaigning on issues that affect democracy. So that's where we felt that once we embark in a process of campaigning around issues, I mean, concentrating on each other, it might be lessened because of our primary focus will be on how do we ensure that we organize or we campaign on issues that are affecting workers. So we are in the process of doing that. And one thing that we also need to be mindful of is that Saftu is just, we are a new federation with challenges resource-wise, but we are trying our level best that at least we must be there, we must be seen on the theater of struggle, we must be seen as a federation that is taking issues that are affecting workers. But it is a process, it's a struggle within a struggle. But we are confident that we will be getting there. And with the level of enthusiasm that was portrayed by workers from different May Day, reflecting, doing an introspection, we are saying that as the leadership of the Federation, going back to the National Executive Committee, we are confident that it will be the process that we must be able to speak to issues that are affecting workers in general, especially the working class, because from the Saftu side, we've got a structure that accommodates the informal sector, which is known as the National Working Class Committee.
So how then do we deal with some of the issues as we move on quickly? You spoke about some of the demands, and we touched on the issue of unemployment. And allow me to start there. As much as you're a party that deals with the rights of workers per se, how then do you deal with the issue or address the issue of unemployment, or at least for government to deal with the issue of unemployment? Yes?
Let me make a typical example. You know, in one of the May Day celebration that we attended, we were addressed by workers from Teneku here in the Eastern Cape. And we've seen how the industrial policy in South Africa, it is failing workers and is actually contributing to the high employment rate. We've just realized that across the value chain of the assembling of motor cars, that the industrial policy only concentrates on the OEMs at the detriment of other sectors across the value chain. The downstream, an example of the components manufacturer, to such an extent that it was also brought to our attention that in that value chain, the OEMs, they are comfortable to source components from companies outside South Africa. Whereas our industrial policy, together with the Auto Master Plan of 2035, it speaks about localization with an intention of creating jobs. So in an absence of having policies that are explicit, and the government has to pronounce that it cannot be correct and allow the OEMs to source components outside South Africa, because of that, as it may, workers are going to lose their jobs. So these are some of the initiatives that we've realized that we've got policies here in South Africa, but they are not addressing issues of job creation. So this is just a typical example, especially in relation to what we were confronted with in one of the May Days. And to such an extent that workers at Teneku, their conditions of employment were down varied. I mean, workers would be earning 116 per hour. And during the Section 189, they were told that in order for them to preserve jobs, their rate of pay was reduced from 116 to 67 rand. I mean, where on earth would a person be able to sustain life if you are under those conditions? So these are some of the conditions we're saying that the industrial policy is not assisting us as South Africans. We've got progressive master plans, but when it comes to monitoring the localization in that industrial policy, I think that's where the problem lies. So issues of job creation, I think it has to be the primary focus. Like the government of South Africa, the president, coming from the SONA, he was talking about how they are intending to create jobs. It cannot be that we fold our arms that they're talking about creating jobs, whereas they're allowing big companies to allow companies to move out of South Africa, disinvest from South Africa, whereas they can still source those products outside South Africa. What about the people who will be losing their jobs internally in South Africa?
All right. Ruth, and maybe to fast-track the conversation, Saftu has its core, at the core campaigns that you have with your allies in the working class, right? And we touched on the issue of unemployment, and I think one other big issue that Saftu has always been the issue of a minimum living wage of 75 rand per hour, which equates to 12,500 per month for workers. But what are some of those other key issues or key demands that Saftu focuses on and impresses on, for the plight of the workers?
Okay. Another demand that we also put forward, it's the total adherence to occupational health and safety measures at our workplaces. I mean, it's a common cause that most of our establishments, they don't comply with the health and safety provisions. So we are saying that this is one of the campaigns that you're going to wage. And we know that workers in various establishments, they ended up being hurt and others losing their limbs. And women are suffering. I mean, especially those that are working in furnaces. We know that some of the, especially the female comrades, they will continuously be having their monthly periods as a result of being exposed to those unhealthy, unhealthy and unsafety work conditions. So this is one of the campaigns that we are going to be waging. And then we are also talking about the austerity measures that we are calling for an expansion of the public sector so that more teachers, nurses, police and correctional services, social workers and traffic can be higher than be better paid. As citizens of this country, we are very much disadvantaged by the level of service delivery that we are getting from our police station, our clinics, as a result of the austerity measures of cutting e-budget. So we are saying that we will be waging a campaign. In actual fact, we've already started when we took it to the street last year, that it cannot be correct that the level of crime that we are currently confronted with, and there's a shortage of more than 200,000 police that are able to render e-service. It's not there.
Yeah.
And I think the list is a bit endless.
Yes, so because we literally have a few minutes left in the conversation. So I just wanted to find out, and out of sheer curiosity, Ruth, earlier on when you mentioned the issue of unions not speaking in one voice, I mean, are there situations where a Saftu and a COSATU, for argument's sake, sits together and talk about the plight of the workers?
It started at ESCOM, where we've seen during the wage negotiations, workers from NUMSA and workers from NUM, they came together addressing their issues together. And as a result of that, the leadership of both unions had to follow what workers at the shop floor started doing. And it's one of the things that we need to comment. That unity of workers that was portrayed by workers at ESCOM. I think it started then, and continuously when they were embarking on their wage negotiations, we've seen unity of workers across their logos. And even now, in the current wage negotiations of the public sector, we've seen how workers from COSATU, FEDUSA, and Saftu came together and addressed their issues, challenging the government, how they reneged, how they unilaterally implemented the agreement. So that unity that was portrayed by workers, I think is commendable. The 24th of August, when we went out, both Saftu and COSATU, I think these are some of the typical examples that can be able to talk about them. And especially at the space where we are dealing with issues of climate change and just energy transition. I think there's unity that is being portrayed by both workers from COSATU, FEDUSA, and Saftu. Differences will continuously be there. But what is important is how do we unite as workers on issues that are affecting all of us. So it is a process, and it's a positive step towards the right direction. And what is important for us as leaders is to how do we be able to sustain and harness that unity with an intention of making sure that we speak to workers from our shop floors.
All right, Ruth, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Appreciate your time. That is Saftu's Ruth Ntlokotse, who's speaking to us about the plight of the workers in 2023.